Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to a new edition of the Tom and John Show. Our guest today is Frank Wong. Most everybody knows who Frank is, and we'll have him take the lead on two or three items, I think three, as the day goes on, with the main emphasis on bees and some information that a lot of you probably wonder about but don't have in your crop. Of course, my colleague John Kaminsky is going to take the interviews portion, and John, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thanks for Frank for joining us. I know that you just landed at the headquarters in Bear. Where is that's in North Carolina?
Yeah, we're in Raleigh, North Carolina, or just by the Research Triangle Park, so in between Durham and Raleigh. And you can see all the magic happening behind frosted glass.
They make sure that you have frosted glass so we can't see all the big.
Well, one of these days on the Tom and John Show, what we'll do is we'll do a walking tour through Bay Area. You can see where all the magic happens. So.
People doing headstands.
I can guarantee it's not a Facebook type atmosphere with people skateboarding through hallways and stuff. So.
It would be a different tour than I got with you at Facebook for sure. But Frank, before we get started, I know we're going to talk a little bit about your role as regulatory affairs with Bayer, but I just wanted to give a brief background and then let you expand on it. So you're from California. You somehow made your way to the East Coast and went to Cornell and got your PhD. Was that with Frank?
No. That was back in a prior life when I was working on apples and grapes.
Oh, apples and grapes, right. You and Megan Keneally.
Yeah.
And then
Daniel Mikowski, too. All three of us came out of a non-turf department and ended up doing turf grass for a career. So
it shows you the weight of Cornell in terms of being able to say, hey, look, this person is well-trained and diverse, and we can send them off to Kansas State or URI. And you went to UC Riverside, where you were a professor there for several years. You went all the way through and became an associate professor. But then you took a job with Bayer and have made your way through a few different areas, I guess, and now you're the regulatory affairs specialist with Bayer Crop Science, right? So give me the 30,000-foot view of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, well, it was such an interesting position I couldn't say no, and there were some other things going on as well. But basically, my job is to work with the different industries, all the non-crop industries, to provide feedback and also some initiatives to work with agencies like EPA for pesticide registration. So a lot of times, like if the EPA has got questions about, say, turf pesticide, I work with, say, GCSAA to provide, them information as well as advocating for our industries as far as, things that maybe the EPA should pay attention to in preparing their rebuttals to registrations for products, so on and so forth. And it's really funny because now I'm working on turf, pest management, vegetation management, and also vector control. So I'm going from golf courses to railroads to food kitchens to Zika control right now. So it's been a pretty big shift as far as working on things like Wadia Patch in the good old days.
Did you go to National Golf Day or whatever that was recently?
Oh yeah, that is, by the way, that is awesome. So I've been kind of playing in the perimeter for a long time on that event, but this is the first year that I actually got to go as a delegate. And I can't, because of being with Bayer, I can't easily go and do the lobbying. But it was really cool to see how GCSAA provided most of the firepower as far as folks that went up on the Hill and talked about issues for golf. And it wasn't just like superintendent issues. You have like 70% of the delegation being superintendents going out there and advocating for what golf does for the economy and the environment, so on and so forth. So for those of you who are listening, if you haven't had a chance to be a part of National Golf Day, check in with GCSAA as far as how you can participate in that, because it is a really cool event. And not only GCSAA, but other industries and or other aspects of industries, we can get a way into that event.
Yeah, I didn't see that much of it. I saw more about it last year, but I don't know what was going on this year when it was going on. But I didn't see a lot. But I know that they do a lot of really good things, and that it's becoming bigger and bigger, and really promoting all of the positive things that the turf industry does, which is good. So you went to that, which is in DC, and one of the topics we wanted to talk about, and you said you wanted to give kind of an overview of some of the things that are going on in Maryland and Connecticut, and you singled out those two states. And to be honest with you, I don't really, aside from Maryland being crazy and Montgomery County being crazy, I don't really know what that means. So what are you talking about when you say some of the things that are going on in those two areas?
Well, the only thing they have in well, it's interesting. They have in common both some very recent pollinator protection laws, and they're also states that you have a pretty big footprint in. So I don't know if there's a correlation or connection between that.
They got the hell out of both of them, though. So.
Okay, well, it's just a really good time to maybe talk a little bit more about bees and pollinators as we're going into the season as far as insect control on turf. And it's just kind of highlight some of the things that are going on, and putting in the context of pollinator protection and what happened recently in Connecticut and Maryland. We talked about this last time I was on the show, and pollinators and bees, whether it's honeybees, bumblebees, monarchs, I mean, it's a total political hot button right now for pesticide policy and environmental issues. And one of the frustrating things right now is that there's a lot of public opinion, a lot of political things that are going on that are basically not necessarily listening to the science. Right now, if we, I think some people are getting frustrated because, they hear all the stuff about, the bees disappearing, so on and so forth. And again, some of that is maybe a little bit hyped up by the mass media, but EPA and other federal departments and agencies are, trying really hard to adhere to the science. So they're trying to, do the risk assessments, so on and so forth. But, it takes time, and I think people often get a little frustrated. So what we're seeing happen in Connecticut and Maryland is that the legislatures went in front of the regulation or the science, and in both Maryland and Connecticut, they've just said, well, we're just going to classify neonicotinoids, or basically that group of pesticides that includes merit and arena, safari, a number of other insecticides. We're just going to classify them as restricted out of hands of homeowners, and basically make it so that you have to be a certified applicator to apply it. And that in itself is not necessarily horrible, because most of the guys in our industry either have a pesticide certification or work for a certified applicator. So in either case, you would be covered to apply neonicotinoids under the legislation that was passed in both states that would take effect in 2018. So essentially, in some respects, it's business as usual. But why Connecticut and Maryland are bad is because it just puts this big rubber stamp on our industry saying pesticides are bad. And I think it really clouds some of the science and some of the studies that are going on out there right now as far as the impact of pesticides as well as other environmental factors on pollinators and the environment. So I think one of the things I want to talk about today was specifically as we're going into grub control season, and guys are putting out applications on turf for preventive grub management, things that they can do to kind of keep themselves out of trouble. I think that in this situation where we have a very heightened sensitivity towards pesticides, if some guy accidentally does something that could be misconstrued, it could cause a potential firestorm as far as bad public press. So.
Before we get into that, because you'll offer some insight in terms of what people can do, Tom, I wanted to ask you, like, it seems like there's a huge change in terms. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I haven't been around all that long, but it seems like there's a huge change where we're seeing a lot of these individual states or regions or groups that are putting more restrictions on some of the use of pesticides or what we do in general. Tom, is this something that you've seen develop over the entire course of your career, or do you see that as being more prominent now than what it was then? I mean, maybe this was happening all along, and it just seems more dominant now.
Well, no, I don't think it was happening all along. I think there's been kind of a gradual increase, little by little by little, as more activists get involved in the process. And that's not a surprise, really. When you think about all of the other ways that things happen that are similar. And I don't know where the end game is. I think it's going to be a matter of people taking a stand in certain areas, people infusing more science into the process. We all know how legislators and regulators operate. They're all politicized. If they see data that doesn't make them feel happy, they don't want to use it.
Right. Yeah, that's my concern. And Frank, you mentioned that in the personal or public perception versus the data. You also mentioned that it seems like they're trying to get more data. Do you think that we're going to get to a point where public perception doesn't ever dominate and actual data does? Seems to me like I don't know. I don't know. People on Facebook, and there's one person in particular I don't want to call out, but she posts stuff all the time about how like GMOs are like killing us and the world is gonna die, and I read this stuff and I'm just like, oh God, it's like I have no energy anymore at 41 years old to even get into the discussion and argument about it because I just don't have time for it. I know it's your job, so you have to have time for it. But I'm just curious as to how much data could ever become important, and if not, it's a little disheartening since I'm a researcher and knowing that my data could be good and useful, but not doesn't get used because of public perception.
Yeah, it's very challenging, and we would hope that regulation, and I want to sound really boring here for a second, but basically, if you're making rules and regulations, at least let that be based on some kind of science. And I think people get frustrated because science isn't perfect, but you do the studies that you can, and then you extrapolate from them. But right now, there's just so much just public opinion on stuff, and I feel like they're doing regulation by dancing by the star, dancing with the stars, phoning in your vote on whether something should be banned or not. And
I was voting for that. I was voting. My girl, Miss Montana, didn't win. I was.
It's going to get worse before it gets better. Kind of a funny story. I'm going to call out, my good friends Mark Weston and Scott Ramsey and Steve Curry up in Connecticut, Massachusetts. We were going around and around this weekend. Apparently, somebody had made a pesticide application on a sports field up in Middletown, Connecticut, and people were freaking out. And you dig a little bit deeper. There was no mention of what pesticide it was. It could have been who knows, some like vinegar and mineral oil. Who knows? But also there was this thing where the league that was coordinating the play didn't pay attention to any of the signs or any of the schedules, and so you have all this ignorance going on this situation. But at the end of the day, the mass media reports that pesticides were sprayed and they're indiscriminate killers and you harm children, and it's like, holy smokes, and I think I hate to say it, but there's just lack of science education in our current society that really hurts us when it comes to these things, and people are really just freaking out because they're not necessarily understanding that there's an inherent risk or lack of risk involved.
Yeah.
It's really easy for us to argue because we're in that scientific environment, but I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of just science communication that just does not get done very well out in the public sphere.
Yeah, it flies under the radar. When somebody sees a spreader, for the most part, and I'm generalizing, but what's their perception of that? Somebody put it on fertilizer.
Yeah.
If you see a sprayer, all we think about is what? Pesticides. Or in fact, they could both be the other way around.
Right.
And often are.
Yeah.
That's public perception, and that's how things go.
Yeah, there was this meme floating around on the internet or through Twitter and Facebook recently. I really liked it. It showed a glass of wine and something like, people are freaking out about 1 part per billion of a suspected carcinogen while ignoring the 35 million parts per billion of a known carcinogen in that glass. So it's, again, you're right, Tom. Public perception is very powerful in this case. It's not necessarily people aren't cuddling up to a lot of pesticides and the chemical technologies that we're using. So it is a challenge,
They're more taken with something seductive.
Yeah. That has been a perennial challenge for our industry, is making pesticides sexy. Again, that just even sounds wrong saying it. But.
Need some different marketing approaches, I think. If that's Frank, one of the things that you mentioned that you wanted to talk about, and you mentioned the Connecticut application, Middleton, was pesticide safety. So what are some things that you are advising people on in terms of their applications, things they should be doing?
Yeah. Well, okay. So right now, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting to be an old man, so I can kind of do the old man, point. But yeah, both you and I, John, are getting to that age. But I think right now, as long as everyone's just aware that there's a lot of people out there sensitive about bees and butterflies, and I think for especially whether you're golf or lawn and landscape, to read the pesticide labels and know that first of all, there are bear with me, on the neonicotinoid pesticide labels, there is actually a big picture of a bee there saying, warning, this product will harm bees, so on and so forth, and we kind of just call it the bee box. But again, whether it's a neonicotinoid product or a number of other insecticides, it is probably highest risk to being plants that are bee and butterfly attractive when they're actively foraging. So again, if you're out there and you got a whole bunch of lavender or something like that, and you got aphids and you see all these bumblebees in there, you probably shouldn't spray insecticides right on top of those bumblebees as they're foraging, because you're going to do some hurt. So again, knowing what products you're using, what the labels say, and really trying to minimize applications for foraging pollinators is going to be really important, because nobody right now needs dead bumblebees in the parking lot making people upset. I mean, there's just, we are unfortunately in a very visible part of the agricultural kind of spectrum. So again, you might not necessarily see a incident in a soybean field, but if it happens at Penn State University golf course, people are going to see it. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Well, how often, based on the timing of when these applications are supposed to be made, based on life cycles, how much overlap is there between the foraging of these bees and the applications, if they're done properly? I mean, is the timing the same, or is there real potential to have it out there at the time they're foraging?
Yeah, it depends on the product, but I can, I've been fooling around the most with neonicotinoids for the last 2 years. But essentially, if you can avoid many of those sprays during the whole blooming period, that's, I think, the safest bet. You know, either apply early in the season, wait pre-bloom, or wait till you have bloom drop to control those targeted pests. Kind of swinging around to talk about turf, and that's been on my mind the most because, again, you know, we're going into the season where guys are doing grub control, so you're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of turf being treated in the next few weeks. John Larson from Dan Potter's lab at University of Kentucky did real seminal work on minimizing the risk of weed exposure to pesticides. And essentially, it's control any kind of blooming weeds. So whether you're controlling them with herbicides or mowing them off before application, making the application, basically making the application and watering it in. So those two things: mowing, applying. Mowing and watering it after application reduces down the exposure by like 5%.
Frank, you're breaking up a little bit. Can you change your setting back to a little bit higher? I missed just the last part of what you said. I wanted to make sure.
Maybe you can edit out some of that, but
no, I just want to make sure we didn't miss it. You said that making
less goofy. Is that better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So essentially, what I was saying was, Larson's work that came out of University of Kentucky. Basically, if you remove flowering weeds, so mow off clover, dandelion, or control them with herbicides, and then water in your neonicotinoid application, so Merit, Arena, whatever. Just by doing those two dumb things, you've reduced down your bee exposure by like 99.4%, 99.5%, around that range. So, it seems like just as practitioners, just by following the best management practices, we can do a lot to reduce any kind of exposure for pollinators by doing that. So,
I'm gonna mute Tom. So I guess that lens then, like some people could look at that. I can argue on both sides of it. Well, you just told us that we need to now apply more products, in this case herbicides, to get rid of the flowers that are out there from clover and those, and then that'll make our problems go away. And I don't know. I can see the argument on both sides, but to me, like, first of all, it's a managed turf system. Like getting rid of clover in that system makes perfect sense. And if that doesn't allow a spot for all the bees to come when you're going to put the herbicide down, like you said, 99.4 or 99.5% minimization of the exposure of the bees to the insecticide, that seems like a positive thing to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like for example, somebody had brought up at a meeting earlier this year, well, you're applying all these pesticides or insecticides to fairways and roughs. What's wrong with you? The flip side of that is taking severe damage from grubs and then having skunks and voles and all this kind of stuff, tearing up your fairways and roughs, and then you end up with a $20,000 bill for seed and sod and so on and so forth. So there's a reason why guys are doing this. It's not that you're just spraying pesticides willy-nilly because you like doing it. There's a benefit. I think one thing that our industry could be probably better about is maybe having some prescribed practices as far as habitat, that's set aside on courses or landscapes for pollinators. Because again, if you are trying to encourage pollinator populations, they gotta have food. They gotta have places to be. And you know what? If you've got like an acre of wildflowers on the course somewhere, they really don't have to be treated or managed. So that's kind of a win-win for a lot of folks as far as balancing out the environmental equation, so to speak.
Yeah. So, Maryland and Connecticut, and maybe down the road some others are going to start making their own laws that dictate how you can apply things, and maybe taking it out of the homeowner's hands. You said it's probably not going to change that much from a professional standpoint, but from a homeowner's, maybe it's going to reduce in some cases. And then you offer some suggestions about pesticide safety. Where do you think the future is going in terms of is this going to drive some maybe biological development, or is this going to drive just new laws that are going to ixnay all of our pesticides, or what? I mean, where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I think the biggest danger is driving the conversation away from science. Like for example. Okay, so everybody's equating neonicotinoids with bee declines. But, if you go out and spray a pyrethroid, you go out and spray an organophosphate or carbamate on foraging bees, you're going to smoke them. I mean, it's really interesting how the conversation is so focused on one class of chemistry and is tended to ignore a lot of pesticides that can have a very negative effect as well. So if we see kind of the conversation become more and more political, then again, you just start losing objectivity when you start, coming to actual laws and regulations. So that's, I think, the biggest danger in this happening. It's really interesting to note, for example, that two biological soft products like neem oil and spinosad, if you apply those to bees, you're going to smoke those too. But those have not come up in the conversation. So again, it's really hard to tell where this whole thing is going. But definitely, I think my gut feel is that if this becomes more, or it continues to be political, you'll see the loss of more chemical classes without necessarily a good set of replacements coming down the road. So again, it's one of those things where I think unintended consequences could be worse than what folks originally intended to do. And again, I'm not saying that anybody who's out there trying to protect pollinators and habitat is off the rocker or in a bad space. I just think that we haven't had enough good conversations between some of the opposing groups where you're actually relying on science and not just talking from the gut, so to speak.
Yeah, it's tough because I realize that this is a business. I mean, you're a golf course and you're $1 billion industry, and I realize that drives a lot of it, and business economics drives pretty much everything. I mean, it's very few times that we throw that out the window and just say like, oh, okay, this is unless there's overwhelming data that something is killing people or doing something. So it's tough. I mean, I think we could all be smarter and a little bit better in terms of our use and not just go spray haphazardly. But I don't think many golf course superintendents and turf managers do that. I mean, I think most of the time they're trained and educated and know life cycles and know the timing, know the appropriate place to and not to apply.
Well, what's really interesting as you've seen a lot of these legislative things develop in the states, guess who is not being necessarily targeted? It's the golf course industry, and I think that reflects on the fact that there is a high degree of professionalism in our industry, with the pesticide education and certification, annual education credits, so on and so forth. And I'm not like beating on our chest or anything like that, but if legislation was directed directly at golf courses, it wouldn't necessarily have a good chance of passing. And that's what's kind of bothering me about Connecticut and Maryland too, is they went after the weakest wildebeest in the herd. I mean, homeowner uses, they don't really have a trade organization or industry group that can represent those uses. So it's a little underhanded and very again, political in those situations. But I'm really glad that our industry has the level of professionalism that it does. That, again, I mean, really represents our members as students and responsible pesticide users.
Yeah, but if you're from a golf side or a professional side, whether it's an LCO or golf or whatever, don't you see them going after that weakest wildebeest as a stepping stone to then just keep going after more and more, as opposed to just knocking that off, appeasing their constituency because it's all politics? Are they just happy to knock off that one thing and then not go after the bigger dog, or are they just building up to go after those?
Exactly. It's almost like you read the playbook, and I think that's the inherent danger, I think, of having the homeowner uses targeted successfully. Because an argument that could be made is like, well, if it's not safe enough for homeowners, then maybe the lawn and landscape guys, it's not safe for them, and then it's not safe for the golf courses, and then eventually it'll come to agriculture. But it's a definite progression of targeting uses in different industries. And I would have to say that the homeowner uses are probably the most vulnerable. But when a lot of the political activity has died down over that, I would not be surprised to see lawn and landscape groups targeted very heavily by the same kinds of laws.
Yeah, well, time will tell, I guess. I mean, I think the one thing for me, and we'll wrap it up here, I think the one thing for me that I like about all of this pressure is it makes all of us react and reassess what we're doing to make sure that we are doing the most responsible thing. I think from the standpoint of companies like Bayer, I think it makes them realize where there's potential future in terms of their products, and maybe things like biologicals, which I'm sure somebody will complain about those too once they come out, but maybe effective use of biologicals or effective biologicals for the use of controlling certain insecticides or fungi, that could help drive innovation. So from that standpoint, I think there's some positive about it, but just going off public perception as a scientist, sometimes you absolutely wrong.
Yeah, but I guess my last, if I had a take-home message from today's show, is just hey, golf is doing a great job as far as being an environmental steward and protect the pollinators. Just as we're going into the season, review that stuff with your crews, with your employees. We're doing a great job so far. Let's not get a black eye and get negative public attention for our industry at this point in time.
Good. I think that's well said. So as we wrap up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and let everybody have a final word. If you have to promote anything or talk about anything, we can obviously do that. Tom, I'll start with you, and then I'll go me, and Frank, I'll give you the final word. So, Tom, anything?
I think the final word, as we've gone through this for a half hour or so, is that I think in general the professional turf manager is well trained. They know what they're doing, and one of the important aspects about what they do is communicating, and they're very good at that job if they're in a responsible job, which most of them are. And then they've got followers, members who are saying, "I didn't know that, really," and then they spread the message. So I think that's a unique aspect of particularly golf turf.
Yeah, and that's a point I hadn't thought about, because the superintendent has the ear of people that aren't necessarily in turf but are in other professional areas because they're members of the club, and may share that positive message with their group. So that's a positive thing. Yeah, so I don't know, Frank, I thought it was good. I think that the information's good. What we need is somebody in here that's on the opposite side of things to argue with you and us, to really spice it up. But then I think my head would explode if we had that. But I'm gonna give you the last word, but I want to thank you for coming on. I just wanted to mention for me, I've got a lot of internship visits coming up, so follow me on iTweetTurf on Twitter. so that you can see all the shenanigans I'm getting into. Tomorrow I go to York Country Club, Marion, Baltusrol on Wednesday, and Wannamoisett in Providence on Thursday. So I'll be making my rounds here this week. And then the U.S. Open next week. So.
Sounds like, you do. I always say this, but we do have somebody's dream job. You guys do realize, so we get to do some neat stuff. So.
Other people that would go, I would never want to do that. So. The last word for you, Frank. If you want to promote anything or push anything, sell some bear product. I'm sure they'll be happy.
Oh, no. Just like I said, read the labels. Make sure you know what's going on with pollinators. Please don't smoke any bees by accident. You guys know where to find me on Twitter at Turf Pathology. Even though I'm getting sucked into railroads and Zika virus and other kind of fun things like that, always appreciate a chance to work with turf guys and golf course industry. It's hard to not miss your first girlfriend when it comes to the industry. So
nice.
So thanks Tom, thanks John for giving me the opportunity to work with you guys this week.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I will make a mention too. Our next episode is on June 23rd. Probably at 10 in the morning. I don't even know what day of the week that is, but we have Beth Gertall from Auburn University, so that should be good.
Thursday.
Thursday? All right, so Thursday she's going to talk to us about some of the POA work she's doing and also the recent stints in Cuba. She's been there a few times, and I know I went in December, so I'm excited to hear what her stories are about. With that, I'll sign off. Frank, I appreciate it again. Good luck with the rest of the season and everybody else, too. So, see you later.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.